Hey, my name is Beau. I am a music teacher and musician. And in this video, I want to talk about values clarification for musicians. So, if you are a serious musician, maybe you're at music school, or maybe you're a music teacher that's also pursuing your own musical projects kind of during the day, or maybe you're a recording artist or something like that. Part of being a professional musician is executing musical projects. So you're going to have goals, you're going to have projects, and that's kind of important to keep your career moving forward, or just for interest's sake. It's more interesting to have projects than to just kind of endlessly randomly learn things, which is fun, but some kind of goal is usually very satisfying. But what can happen is you can get kind of tunnel visioned on finishing the project, and that can be a little it can be a little frustrating because the goal is off in the future. And so as a response to that kind of whole goal setting mindset, people will say things like just focus on the process and not the results. And that sounds nice, but how do you actually do that? How do you focus on the process and not the results? Because you're, learning this music to perform, you're writing this music to record an album, or God knows what you're doing, but you have some kind of goal. So how are you actually supposed to kind of embrace the process? And this is where values clarification is quite a profound technique or exercise to run through once in a while, just to check in on how you're doing with your musical journey and adventure. I first learned about this from Stephen Hayes, the originator of acceptance and commitment therapy, or acceptance and commitment training, if you want to call it that. ACT, as it's pronounced, the word ACT, not ACT. ACT, as it's pronounced, is a research-driven kind of psychological intervention that you can run on somebody, or just a branch of psychology, if you want to call it that. It comes from the behavior science wing. But ACT gives people a set of tools so that they can develop better psychological flexibility. And psychological flexibility is basically 6 component skills. And if you haven't heard about ACT, you should go learn about it, because it's pretty wonderful in terms of what it can do for your life. You can read about it, or see a therapist and all of that kind of stuff. But there's a component of acceptance and commitment therapy called values. And one of the things that Steve Hayes and his colleagues mention is that ACT has these 6 components, and when you take one of them out, the whole system doesn't work as well. And so in this video, I want to emphasize the values clarification part of the whole system, because it's very relevant to musicians and how they practice, and music teachers. And so let's say I have a goal of giving a classical guitar concert. I'm a classical guitarist, and that's my goal. And now every day I'm kind of grinding away. Let's say I can force myself to practice for 2-3 hours a day, whatever it takes. That's good. That's the goal side, and that is healthy to do. And you probably want to pursue goals or projects, like I said before. But one of the things that often messes people up is, while they're achieving their goals, they're not necessarily taking care of their values. And so the way that I would define values, and this is slightly different than the way it's typically presented in acceptance and commitment therapy, but I think it still very much lines up. I think about values as 2 separate things. You have areas of value, or domains of interest that you value, and then you have character qualities, or virtues, if you want to call them that. Some people really don't like the way virtues comes off, but let's look at each really quickly. So on this side, we have areas of interest. So we know you're interested in music because you're a musician, and that's why you're watching this video, hopefully. But within music, there are further sub areas that you're probably interested in. So myself, as a classical guitarist, I am interested in classical guitar. I'm also interested in certain harmonic things with music. I like studying chord progressions, and I like learning how to improvise, and I like studying different rhythms. So, there's different parts of playing music that interest me. Another classical musician might not have an interest in learning to improvise at all. They might not really be that interested in studying music theory or studying how chord progressions are built. It might just not be that interesting for them. They might have a bigger emphasis on maybe performing live. Like maybe that's, what they want to focus on in their musical kind of career or adventure, or whatever you want to call it. And so it can be very valuable to draft a list of what are these things that you care about musically. And so hopefully in your pursuit of this goal that you have, whether it's to record an album or perform or learn, XYZ music, hopefully these areas that you value, you're able to bring that into the practice room. And so for example, if I'm going to perform a classical guitar concert as my goal, and it's going to take a lot of work to get that together, if I know like, well, I want to improve my rhythm, I want to improve my ability to hear, counterpoint and audiate weird things like that, then I can actually in the practice room be living my value even though the goal is not complete. And that is the power of values, is that you don't have to push the satisfaction and the pursuit of the value off into the future. So the goal, even if you're pursuing it, a lot of people develop a weird relationship with the goal because they don't feel good until the goal's done, but they got to grind a lot to get to the goal. And it's this weird kind of dynamic psychologically. But if you know that you value, working on audiating different harmonies, for example, every time you sit down to practice, you can virtually do that. And so you can live your values while you're doing that. And so you can actually contemplate this for your whole life, but I'm just breaking this down musically speaking. So it can be good to draft a list of like, what are the things that you value musically speaking? What are the areas of music that kind of fire you up that you want to accentuate? I'm at a phase in my life where I'm like less interested in performing music live. I'm more interested in learning music, writing music, recording music, and that's fine. That's just what I value. I mean, no one can really tell me that that's right or that's wrong. And so that's what I lean into right now anyway. That's what I like. And so we have that kind of valued areas. And so you can draft a list of that, and you can hopefully see how your daily actions towards your bigger goal are satisfying those valued areas that you have. Now, on the other side of the equation, we have character qualities or virtues, if you want to call them that. Now, this is more about how you actually act as a human being. So, some people have values of being curious, of being mindful, being patient, being strategic, being hardworking. Again, there's no correct list. No one can come in and say, you should value being hardworking. You should value being, curious. You should value being patient. Philosophically, you can't really, you don't have a leg to stand on. You could say there would be a benefit in you embodying these things, but philosophically, you can't really tell someone you have to value this. They can just be like, well, I don't, so screw it. But what happens is, if you uncover a couple things that you value, your practice sessions, the work that you're doing towards your goal, they become ways of embodying those values. So take, for example, I value being enthusiastic, high level of energy, and I value working hard, but I also value being strategic. I don't want to just brute force practice. I want to use scientifically informed, or at least empirically reasonable practice techniques. And those are the things that I value. I'm not saying you have to value them. I'm not saying anyone has to value them. But when I bring those qualities to my practice, when I practice with a sense of enthusiasm and a sense of structure to my practice session and a sense of industriousness or hard work, that makes me feel good. I don't actually need to wait until I perform this classical guitar concert 3 months down the road for me to be fulfilling those values. And this is why in acceptance and commitment therapy, I talked earlier about there being 6 component kind of skills that fuse together to make this bigger skill of psychological flexibility. The last 2 skills in acceptance and commitment therapy, you have values, clarification or values, and then you have committed action. And so committed action is really goal setting, going after things in the real world. And these 2 together, when you have the balance, they just feed back on each other in such a healthy way. Because what it ends up being like, and this is an analogy, I think Russ Harris uses this in his book, The Happiness Trap, which is kind of it's a more mainstream demonstration or introduction to acceptance and commitment therapy. He talks about values are really like a compass. So like if I value being curious, or if for me, I value being more so like, I like the science edge to things. I like being structured and strategic, and I like being enthusiastic. So those are kind of like North Stars, or they're just directions on my compass. That's just facing north. If I'm showing up to a practice session and I'm using some kind of interest in the science of practicing, and I like being a little fired up and enthusiastic, I'm pointing in that direction. I'm never going to get there. No amount of being enthusiastic is going to get me to the end of that. I can't just be like, well, I was 1,000% enthusiastic on that practice session. Now I'm done with enthusiasm. Now it's time to move on to another goal. That's not the way it works. It's an endless, never-ending wellspring of just facing in that direction. And what the goals end up being, they end up being milestones upon the path. So I have these bigger picture, like musical valued interests. I have these character qualities. And then my goals are just, they are ways of just embodying this in the real world. Because if I'm just randomly enthusiastic or I'm just randomly, scientifically structured, there's nothing wrong with that. That's very good. I'm going to get some fulfillment from being like that in my practice sessions. But now when you bring in the goal that has this kind of finish line and the structure to it, it just seems to motivationally make sense for the human psyche. And so, I'm not saying it's the only framework that you can look at, but if you haven't gone through any of these values clarification exercises, they can really do a lot to kind of perfume some extra interest and motivation and a sense of meaning and purpose into your practice sessions. When you feel like your practice sessions are getting mundane and you're like grinding and you're not really like deriving a sense of meaning or satisfaction, that's a siren going off in your emotional system telling you got to sort out your values. You got to figure out what you care about more. So I'm not saying you'll never have to kind of force yourself to grind a bit in the practice room, but it shouldn't be a day-to-day thing. You kind of should be getting some meaning from the practicing that you're doing. And so my all-time favorite values clarification exercise, you can look this stuff up. There's tons of them that you can do. But my favorite one is to think of someone that inspires you and then figure out why they inspire you. And the reason I like this exercise is just such a gut level, intuitive recognition of what you value. So for example, there is a music teacher in the UK, Paul Harris. Paul, you're one of my favorite music teachers. I think I've read pretty much all of Paul's books. I love his point of views. I love the way he thinks about things. When I hear Paul talk or someone like Paul and I read his books, I just immediately can sense that I resonate with something about the way he is. And for me, as like a concrete example to this, Paul is very warm and caring, and Paul is extremely positive, and Paul is also extremely logical and structured in his thinking. When you read Paul's work, you can tell like this is someone that really can break things down and has a logical kind of, setup in his mind. And those are things that I really value. But what's interesting is I didn't really know that until I thought about that. So, when I was listening to Paul and reading Paul Harris's books, I'm like, man, I really like this guy. Like, I don't know what it is about this guy. Like every time I read something that he writes, it really just like sits well with me. And then you figure out why you're interested in somebody. And so I personally found that is just such a like bang for your buck, minute for minute. That is such a good values clarification exercise because you already kind of intuitively resonate with something about this person and you just need to work backwards and figure out what it is. I find that a lot more effective than doing the other way around, where you try to just sit down with a journal and say, what do I value? And you can do that. Some people do find that beneficial. I just find the thinking of someone that inspires you, there's already the proof that you resonate with something. And so it's just a good place to start from. So, that's why it can be useful to think of some of your musical heroes. You might look up to different musicians for different reasons, but make a list of like, who are your musical heroes? Like what composers do you like? What performers do you like? And think of why are they resonating with you? Those are your values. The reasons they resonate with you, those are the things you value. And then if you bring those things into your, practice sessions, you're probably going to have a better time. Another example for me, like before we sign off here, is like, I love Jacob Collier's like 10x over the top, just larger than life, big personality with creativity. The guy loves being creative. He dives into what he does. He's just over the top about everything. It's fun. It's cool. I like it. I could see why some people don't like it. Some people like more of the like less is more minimalism vibe. But the guy's kind of cool. It's kind of interesting. I like it. And so hopefully that's useful. I think it's a really good thing to check in with. At the very least, maybe every 3 months or so, just like take 20 minutes out of your day and think about like, how am I feeling about my musical goals and what am I doing? And am I getting a sense of meaning or purpose? So I'll leave you with that thought. And yeah, one thing I want to mention as I sign off is I do offer coaching for musicians or music teachers. So I offer online music lessons, online piano lessons, guitar lessons, but I also offer coaching, and I've been finding it's very satisfying to work with. And this is the kind of thing I would work with. So I'll take musicians who are very self-driven. I don't need to teach them how to play music. They're already great at their instruments, but they need to get some of their strategies in place. They need to figure out how to set goals up. They need to figure out how to motivate themselves. They need to figure out how to finish projects and stay on task with things. And that's, checking in with somebody once a week where the conversation is focused on your goals, your interests, and trying to figure out what works for you. That can be very beneficial. I was lucky enough a couple of years ago to do some coaching with this guy for half a year or so. I think just over half a year. And he wasn't even a musician, but it made such a big difference on my musical life. And I feel like if he could have, talked to me about more specific stuff with practicing, it would have, been even cooler. But it's one of my favorite things to do. So if that's something that you would find interesting, you can always shoot me an email and ask some more questions about it. But I hope this video has been helpful. And until next time, have a wonderful day.